coaching carousel continuing as looks like Doug Marrone could be the first coach hired. Looks like he could be staying in Jacksonville. We'll get the latest on that. A lot of news and notes around the NFL. Who better to break it down with us? John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, and the national NFL writer at FanRag NFL here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. We'll start off with a little dusting off some of the Eagles news as you write at 973ESPN.com, John. The scapegoat is Greg Lewis. He was fired today because the Eagles could not catch the football.
Yeah, it's a tough situation for Greg. Obviously, he's a young head coach. He's only 36 years old. Has only been in the profession for a short time. So low man on the totem pole gets blamed for a lack of talent at the wide receiver position. Now, that said, I will at least say that, this group could have probably used a more veteran presence that had more experience as a coach, because they certainly need work on their fundamentals. But you name the coach. I don't know any coach that could have made much out of this group. But that's the NFL, and Greg's going to be moving on.
He is. The Eagles fired Greg Lewis today, and we'll see what they end up doing to fill that spot. Some more NFL news and notes. It looks like the first head coach, checkmark, Doug Marrone. Adam Schefter reporting the Jaguars plan to hire Marrone as their new head coach. He's an interesting hire to me. He had bizarrely left Buffalo, where he had that loophole to get out of the contract. They didn't want him to leave. He left. He thought he was going to parlay that into a better opportunity. It never happened. Here we are a couple of years later. He gets that second opportunity. Do you like the fit of Marrone in Jacksonville?
Well, I think he finally got the better opportunity. I think, as strange as it sounds, that Jacksonville job, talent-wise, it looks pretty good to people outside the organization. They have a lot of young talent. They definitely underachieved under Gus Bradley. So, obviously, they felt very comfortable with the job Doug did with the interim tag, and they elevated him. A lot of talk about Mike Smith, the ex-Falcons coach down there, possibly Tom Coughlin, but they stay in-house, and I think it's a very good spot for him, because it would be almost impossible in that division for that team not to improve. So he's going to look good right off the bat, and then we'll see if it can sort of save the career of Blake Bortles, because ultimately that becomes the key issue with the Jaguars, because he took a major step backwards this season.
Yeah, Marrone, correct me if I'm wrong, he wasn't the most popular guy in Buffalo, right?
No, he wasn't, and certainly after it went down, then he became really, really unpopular. But again, you look at the situation in Buffalo. We've talked about it in the past. One of the issues that doesn't make that very palatable for coaches around this league is because of the front office situation and what a mess it is. And, Doug Whaley, the GM, is there, and he remains there. He was the one who signed the contract. Doug didn't do anything he couldn't do. I think you're right, though, Mike. He thought he was going to get a head coaching job right away.
Right, like he felt he was a miracle worker to do what he did with that Buffalo team, thinking, hey, look what I did with this team.
15-17 over 2 years as the head coach.
And that was supposedly good then.
Yeah, it was. And he thought he'd parlay it into a better situation. Didn't work out at first, but I think it has worked out long-term for him. And I think, as strange as it sounds, as I said, I think the Jacksonville organization is better equipped moving forward than Buffalo.
Talk with John McMullen. A lot of NFL news and notes. We'll get into these games. What about the whole O'Brien thing? There were some reports that he was on the hot seat. He wins the game. The owner comes out and says he'll never be fired. There's some reports that he's not even happy there to begin with. Then Peter King comes out and said if he got fired, he'd be a candidate for at least 2 vacancies right off the bat. Do you think the Bill O'Brien story is settled?
No. And I think people are missing the point of this. Houston may not want to fire him, but he doesn't want to be there.
Did he endorse Osweiler's deal?
Well,
what's your read on that?
There's history, and then there's revisionist history. The revisionist history, he did not endorse it, and he's not happy that basically he's going to go into the 2017 season with Brock Osweiler as the starting quarterback because he doesn't think you can win long-term with Brock Osweiler, and I don't necessarily disagree with him. However, when they signed him, you didn't hear that kind of vitriol right away, even in whispers. So I do think it is, developed over the season as he's watched him play and watched him struggle. And unfortunately for Rick Smith, it's a big cap hit if you try to move on for him after 1 year. You could do it after 2 years. So I think from Houston's standpoint, they're saying, let's bite the bullet. Let's go with Brock Osweiler for another season. And then if he doesn't show drastic improvement, then you can move on, and it's a little more easier to do as far as the salary cap. And Bill doesn't want to go through that again. So a lot of it has to do with how much he's going to push to get out if they lose, as we assume they will, to the Patriots. I still think there's a very good opportunity that Bill O'Brien won't be in Houston next season.
That should be interesting. They'll take on the Patriots coming up. We'll dive into those games a little bit later on as well. Some other news around the league. You talk about some of these teams that are in the playoffs. You look at the non-playoff teams, and obviously Oakland goes out, Carr not playing, so I don't know what you read into them in terms of whether their season's a success or not. But they had to be able to find something better than Connor Cook, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah, there's two schools of thought. If Matt McMullen is not healthy enough to play, that's one thing. But Jack Del Rio has insisted that he was capable of playing. And the fact that he didn't go to him, well, then it looks bad on you because it was pretty evident Connor Cook wasn't ready. And anybody who knows how the NFL goes, if you're a third-string quarterback in this league, you don't get any reps in practice during the regular season. And so basically, that's what happened to Connor Cook for 17 weeks. So he didn't know the offense. He wasn't prepared. And none of that was surprising. And if we take Jack Del Rio at his word, who, by the way, should be in the Coach of the Year conversation overall, but if you take him at his word, McGloin was healthy enough to play, and the fact that he didn't use him, that's pretty bad. That's the way he wants to spin it.
John, I did see, going back to the Texans real fast, Tom Savage was cleared in the concussion protocol. Do they stick with Osweiler for this Patriots game coming up? Is that the way you think they should go?
Yeah, Bill said he earned another start after the game, and he played well enough against Oakland to earn the start. So I can't imagine he's not going to play, but that doesn't mean he's going to finish if he starts, because if it's the kind of beatdown we all expect, and all of a sudden it's 21-0, 24-3, something of that nature, you might see a change. And that might put more stress on the relationship because, hey, Rick Smith, the GM there, he doesn't want to look bad by signing Brock Osweiler to that contract. And all of a sudden you have a head coach who thinks a late-round draft choice making $500,000, $600,000 is a better option.
That's an interesting scenario out there. Yeah, Rick Smith is a guy who you got to start to question him a little bit, right? I mean, this is a team. The Bill O'Brien hate out there sometimes makes me scratch my head. For them to have 8 different quarterbacks and yet have 2 division titles, it shouldn't be hated. He's a miracle worker.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue it's the worst division in football. It probably is, but he's won it 2 consecutive years. Last season it was 4. It was Brian Hoyer. It was T.J. Yates. It was Brandon Whedon. It was Ryan Mallett. This year it was Osweiler and Tom Savage. Hey, I don't care what division you are in the NFL. You win division titles with those kind of names at the quarterback position, you deserve some credit for that.
Hey, John, Packers coach Mike McCarthy did not rule out the possibility of Jordy Nelson playing in the divisional round if he's able to practice by Saturday. Now, how big a factor would that be in that ball game, given that they didn't seem to miss a beat without him?
Well, I think it's a big factor. I think if you go back to last season when Jordy Nelson wasn't there after tearing his ACL, you saw the difference in the Packers offense as a whole. So you might be able to camouflage it for part of the game for a week or two, but when you lose a true number one wide receiver of that caliber, and all of a sudden the dominoes fall from there. Randall Cobb is a great second option. He's a great slot receiver. But as a number one, if you can double team him, you can easily take him out of the game. Devontae Adams as a third receiver, never getting pretty much double teamed, always single coverage. He's tremendous, but if you move him up a slot, it hurts. And that's what happened to Green Bay and the offense in 2015. That's what would happen here. But, you know, when Aaron Rodgers is playing the way he's playing, it becomes, you know, it's almost funny because you're not thinking about how the Packers are going to deal with the number one seed. You're thinking, how in the world are the Cowboys going to stop Aaron Rodgers? And I don't know at this point.
Ben Roethlisberger shed the walking boot that he had going to the press conference yesterday. He got rid of that, said he had just aggravated a previous injury, said his right foot is fine, but are you concerned?
A little bit, and we'll see how it progresses during the week. You know, just the way Ben plays the game, he tends to get banged up. He's been banged up a lot over the years, and there's a difference if you're playing at 100% versus 75, 80, whatever you want to put it at. That could be the difference in a game because to me, that's the most intriguing matchup as far as teams and being evenly matched because both are really, really good. Both are really well coached. Both are talented, maybe in different ways, but it shapes up as a really even football game, and that's the kind of injury, even if it's just a nagging one, that could shift things Kansas City's way.
You put some of the blame on Mike Tomlin for leaving him in there, too, by the way. I mean, according to all reports, that happened late in the game when he was still throwing passes to Antonio Brown and handing off to Le'Veon Bell, and the game had already basically been decided.
Yeah, I never criticize coaches for that. I've said it on the show numerous times. You can't legislate injuries in this league. I go back to Teddy Bridgewater. He suffered a catastrophic non-contact injury in practice, not a game, practice, to use Allen Iverson. So it can happen at any time. If you're healthy, you play. Ben's certainly expecting to play. Antonio, Le'Veon. You can't legislate injury, so I'm not going to look in the rearview mirror and say he made a mistake. He did get hurt on the second to last play of the game, so I understand why people think that, but this is the NFL. It's a playoff game. You play.
John McMullen with us, our NFL insider for FanRagSports.com. CJ Prosise in Seattle. He should practice this week. Now, he needs to get cleared for contact to play in the divisional round, John, but if he's back, and you saw what Thomas Rawls did, what kind of impact is that 1-2 punch adding Prosise to Rawls in the Seattle backfield?
Well, I don't think – I like C.J. Prosise, and I think he's going to be a really good player. He's tremendously skilled. He's sort of a hybrid. He played wide receiver at Notre Dame before moving to running back, so he's one of those guys that can create matchup problems. But you saw Thomas Rawls last week. He's going to be the bell cow. He's going to be the guy to carry it. So if he does play, you know, maybe he gets 2, 3, maybe 4 touches. So I don't think it's going to be that important for this particular game. But certainly moving forward, I think Seattle's got a really good player.
Talking with John here, of course, recapping the games, a little bit of dusting off all the news that came from this weekend. John, let's take a quick little hit, get your quick thought on each of the games. Any surprise in Houston, Oakland?
No, I think we talked about it, is the fact that, you have a third-string quarterback who's a rookie making his first start in playoffs. It's only the third time somebody's made a first start in any particular season in the playoffs this century. It happened to Joe Webb in Minnesota. It happened to Gus Frerotte in Denver. But this is the first time it happened to a rookie. And we thought he'd be overmatched against the number one defense in the NFL, and he was completely overmatched. And it started early with that tremendous athletic play from Jadeveon Clowney. In a lot of ways, I think Oakland made a mistake. If they were going to play him, they should have just said, what the heck? They should have went YOLO, you only live once, and let him throw the ball down the field, because it was evident Houston predicted they would scale back the offense, and they come out throwing all those screens, and the Texans were just like sharks in the water. It almost wasn't fair.
Detroit, they were in the game. The officials, I thought, were horrible in that game, but I still never felt Detroit was really dangerous.
No, I agree. That's the entire feeling I got. And they lost 4 games, 10 this season. The Lions weren't very good. They backed into the playoffs. And they did manage to hang around for a while, as you mentioned, but slowly but surely Seattle pulled away. And I don't think that surprised anyone, considering they've won 10 straight at home in the postseason. And the Lions haven't won on the road in the postseason since 1957. So that wasn't exactly a tough one to predict.
Those were the 2 Saturday games. In the game on Sunday, Miami, same kind of situation. Pittsburgh got off to a hot start, but I just never felt Miami was a factor in that game.
No, they weren't. It started right away with the bubble screen to Antonio Brown. He goes the distance, and then he does it again. It's a tough, time of the year for any team in Florida to go up to Western Pennsylvania when it's basically 0 degrees out. And many predicted they would struggle with that. They did even out a little bit. I thought Matt Moore played well. He moved the football. The problem was he turned it over twice with the fumbles in Steelers territory, or maybe things would have been a little bit different. But it was a tough spot. Another team playing with a backup quarterback against a really good football team on the road. In a lot of ways, this was one of the easiest wild card weekends to pick games in recent memories.
I got to jump in with a PT observation about Heinz Field real quick here, John and Mike. Whoever the engineer is that designed Heinz Field should be fired. Why would you have your home team go downstairs after they just played a physical football game and maybe their foot's injured? Whoever designed that, the fact that the entire one end of the stadium is open, it's no wonder field goal kickers are a dime a dozen there, because the winds that come in off the river, forget about it.
Yeah, well, but it can also help you as far as the home field advantage, because obviously you're more used to it than the opposition in theory. But, yeah, you're not the first person. Tons of people in Pittsburgh complain about the field conditions, number one. That field is always chewed up. And you saw a couple times the field goal kickers pointing at a spot that they thought was good. And the stadium's not that old. Obviously, Pitt plays there, so the University of Pittsburgh. But that field always seems to be chopped up. And so that's another one you can add to the list.
Last game was Giants, and, of course, them falling to the Packers. I mean, I kind of said, they won the game because Rodgers was just that good. There was other factors in the game, but I didn't want to get into the whole boating stuff. I don't think that had anything to do with the game. Beckham just didn't seem like he had it that day. I don't know that's because he was in Miami on Monday is the reason why he didn't have it. I find that hard to believe. But this was a team, look, it was not a playoff team a year ago. They won 11 games this year, but I think we saw why they had not been in the playoffs for 4 years. That's a team that you have been saying all year. They're real. They were lacking in a lot of areas. You saw it yesterday.
Yeah, their margin of error was incredibly small, and once the drop started, and I agree with you, Miami had nothing to do with it. If people want to read about, the history of Ken Stabler, who's in the Hall of Fame, and how many games Oakland won with him partying the night before, forget about on Monday. I don't think that has anything to do with anything, just the fact that the receivers dropped a lot of footballs. And what was a 6-0 lead probably should have been at least, say, 14-0, maybe even 17-0, and that could have shifted things. Because New York basically came in with a tremendous defensive game plan, and they were perfect with it for 26 minutes. Perfect. And then all of a sudden they got the bad punt. It takes one play, a 31-yard pass from Rodgers to Adams down the right sideline. It was a perfect throw, and the skies just dropped on the New York Giants. Think about that. 26 minutes of football, guys. 4 minutes left in the first half. The Packers haven't scored. And by the time
about 5 yards of offense.
38. Yeah. They have 38 points and 400 yards of offense.
Crazy.
I mean, when Rodgers plays like that, I said it here when he was playing the Eagles, there's nothing you can do.
Nope, nothing you could do. He had one of those days where there was nothing you can do. And the Giants, who had a great defense this year, and it's the reason why I picked them to win the game, because defense in the playoffs, I like the defensive aspect. Their defense in the second half just got blitzed. So they move on. The Packers do. The Giants go home. We'll do a little bit more closing the seasons on the the playoff losers tomorrow with John. Last one real fast, clearing out the notebook here. Mike Vrabel will interview for the Rams head coaching vacancy. Here's one of those guys. You heard Matt Patricia's name. He's another interesting guy. McDaniel. So you're starting to hear a couple of other under-the-radar guys start to get some interviews here.
Yeah, by my count, we got 17 people have been interviewed or scheduled to be interviewed for head coaching jobs, and the Rams are in double digits. I mean, they are casting a wide net to try to get this thing right. But I keep going back to the Rams. If you're going forward with Jared Goff, and they have to me, you have to get an offensive coach. And I think ultimately they'll land on an offensive coach to try to maximize his potential. But anytime an assistant like Vrabel gets his name out there, it helps, because once you get that first interview, all of a sudden, take Anthony Lynn. There were 6 openings. He interviewed with 5 teams. So once your name is out there, it helps.
Yeah, and speaking of coaches, John, what was the one that you brought up to me, PT, about?
Joey Porter got some
Porter,
off-the-field trouble, John, and it looks like now the Steelers are going to tell him take a seat for a while because he got in some off-the-field issues last night. What happened with Joey Porter?
Yeah, he got arrested. Now the Steelers are gonna make him take a leave of absence. It doesn't surprise me. They had to do something. I would be shocked if he has his job after the season ends, whenever that is, for the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you're going to be an assistant coach in this league, you're supposed to set sort of a standard for your players. And Joey hasn't lived up to that, both on and off the field. And obviously he's a high-profile former player. But once you cross over, it's a different mentality, and it's certainly not going to be put up with.
All right, John, we'll recap a lot of the playoff losses and what those teams, what direction they're heading to. We were talking about before. Man, they were blowouts in all the wild card rounds. Just think, those were playoff teams. The teams that didn't make the playoffs, how far they feel after teams that did make the playoffs couldn't stack up. So we'll dive into a little deeper than the teams that did not make the playoffs and where they go from here on tomorrow's show. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, guys.